Hi everyone, and welcome to the crime scene photography lecture. Let's get started. Well, let's start by talking about the purpose of crime scene photography. There are four primary purposes of crime scene photographs. First, just like sketches and notes, photographs help us document the scene. This is important not only for investigators at the scene, but also for those who may be called in later, which leads me to the second purpose, providing important information to investigators who are not on scene themselves. Excuse me. For example, crime scene reconstructionists are often asked to consult on cases where the scenes have already been processed and released. They rely, therefore, on documentation, including the crime scene photographs, to help provide them with the necessary information so that they can reconstruct the events in question. A third use of crime scene photographs is for identification and comparison purposes, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. And finally, crime scene photographs can also help assist during the trial phase of a case by using to help refresh the memory of witnesses who are testifying on the stand. They can also be used to substantiate testimony given on the stand by illustrating the truth of a particular statement. And they can be used to help clarify the juror's understanding of a scene by allowing them to visualize the scene or a specific case issue in question. Now, the person in charge of crime scene photography is going to differ by agency. Some agencies will have dedicated crime scene photographers who are responsible for all photographs taken by the department. When I was in my undergrad program, one of the private contractors working overseas for the military was hiring crime scene photographers. They would be responsible for taking evidence photographs relating to roadside detonations, criminal investigations, etc. Larger police departments may also require all evidence-related photographs be handled by crime scene investigators. When I was completing my internship with St. Louis County, we were asked to come take photographs of a police car that had been hit in a parking structure. And I asked why the crime scene personnel were sent to the scene, and the officer told me that St. Louis County PD's procedure required that crime scene investigators document any situations that may require future submission to a jury or an outside agency, and that included insurance claims. Now, other agencies may require patrol or detective officers to do some of their own photography, and they may only use crime scene investigators on larger or more specialized scenes. So it differs by the agency. You have to get to know your own agency protocol. When we talk about crime scene photographs, it's important to understand that there are two types of photographs that are used in crime scene photography. The first and the most often encountered is the documentation photograph. This photograph is not considered evidence by itself, but it will document the location, the position, and any other important characteristics of the scene. This type of photograph can be entered into evidence at court in order to help the trier of fact visualize the scene or a fact in question. The second type of photograph is evidence photographs, and these are photographs that will be used in place of a piece of physical evidence. And so these can be submitted in court as the evidence itself. For example, some types of evidence are often analyzed and compared using photographs instead of the physical evidence piece. Evidence like impressions, latent fingerprints, or tire tracks will often be submitted as a photograph instead of the original piece of evidence that was collected or processed at the scene. So the photographer must take special care when taking evidence photographs because they're going to be later used for analysis and comparison purposes. There are multiple types of documentation photographs that are required at a crime scene. The first photograph should always be a photo identifier. This photograph should contain the case number, the date and time of the photographs, the addresses that the photographs are being taken at, and the photographer's name. Then you can take overall photographs, mid-range photographs, and close-up photographs. I'm going to talk more about each of these over the next several slides. So here's an example of a photo identifier that you're going to actually be using for this class. The advantage of using a photo identifier is that if you change scenes without changing memory cards, you can keep track of the different locations all within that same camera. It also helps you keep track of where the photographs came from over time. Now, if you don't have a photograph identifier card, you can use any piece of paper that has the case information written on it. But in addition to containing the scene information, these identifier cards can be helpful to identify imperfections in the photograph And so they actually help the photographer determine if there are necessary corrections that need to be done. For example, if you're photographing a scene with unnatural lighting, like you're outdoors and it's at sunset, or you're inside and you're underneath fluorescent lights, the identifier card contains color swatches that can help you adjust the color of the images using photo editing software. Similarly, the grayscale on the right-hand side of the card can identify exposure problems. Photographs that are overexposed will not show differentiation between the lower lighted boxes, and photographs that are underexposed will not show differentiation between the higher, darker boxes. Finally, the identifier card also includes an emergency ruler on the left-hand side that's going to allow you to document measurements in a photograph if you have nothing else on you. So it's helpful to have these for various reasons beyond just the case information. Once you have the photo identifier shot, the next step is to take a series of overall photographs. Overall photographs should be taken from a natural perspective, meaning that the photographer should be standing at full height and should take the photographs looking straight ahead. Now, overall photographs document the general conditions of the crime scene, and they should include both the interior and the exterior views of that scene. The exterior views should show how the crime scene relates to the surrounding area, and that can include aerial photos, it can include photographs of street signs, and it will include views of the outside of buildings. The best way to think about overall photographs is that you should walk your viewer from a known location to the crime scene. Oftentimes, good overall photographs will actually start at a street sign because that's a clear marker, right? You have an intersection of two streets, you start at that street sign taking a photo of it, and then you proceed to take a series of photographs showing the viewer eventually how you moved from that street sign to the location of the crime itself. If you have an interior scene, there are two main techniques used to document the overall views of the room. These are the corner-to-corner and the wall-to-wall approach. The corner-to-corner approach requires 4 images of an interior room with 1 image taken from each corner, hence corner-to-corner. These images create enough overlap in all of the photos so that all parts of the room are captured in the image and there are no blind spots that are left out of the photographs. The images here on the slide show you a diagram of the 4 corners approach as well as the resulting 4 photographs that this approach creates. Now, the wall-to-wall approach also requires 4 images, but these images are done looking directly at each wall, looking at a 90-degree angle. As you can see from the diagram, the 4 photographs still overlap in such a way that the whole room is photographed in entirety. Now, if you have a large scene, or if there's a lot of room features that may impede the view across the room, like maybe the room has columns, half walls, or just large furniture, you can use the modified approach to overall photographs. In this approach, we use 16 photographs taken total. 4 photographs use the traditional corner-to-corner approach, and 4 photographs use the traditional wall-to-wall approach. There are also 8 additional photographs taken. At each corner, in addition to the photograph taken towards the opposite corner, the photographer also takes a photograph with the camera parallel to each wall. So you end up taking a photograph looking to the other corner, looking to the wall, and looking to the wall. That ends up with 3 photographs taken from each corner, which are shown in red on this diagram on the slide, and then 4 photographs taken from the center of each wall, which are shown in blue on this slide. This creates multiple points of overlap in the photographs, which again can be useful for reconstructing the scene, particularly if there are things that are in the way of viewing that this multiple approach can get at. Once you complete the series of overall photographs, the next step is to take mid-range and close-up photographs. Mid-range photographs show the evidence in relation to a fixed point in the scene, and that can be the edge of a wall, a railing, a piece of furniture, etc. Close-up photographs are exactly what they sound like. They are close-up images of the evidence by itself. Now, if the close-up image is going to be used for analysis or comparison later on, like a shoe print pattern close-up, then the close-up image should be what we call examination quality. Now, examination quality photographs have several key characteristics that are meant to ensure that the photograph can be used accurately for comparison purposes. First, examination photographs should fill the frame with the evidence, meaning that the evidence should be as large as possible in the image to ensure that all relevant detail is captured. Second, examination quality photographs should be photographed with the camera held directly perpendicular above the evidence, and that ensures that the measurements in the image are not distorted. So the camera should be looking directly down, not angled like that. And finally, third, examination quality photographs should include a scale so that measurements taken from the image can be verified. The scale should be at the same height as the top of the evidence, because otherwise the scale may not be in focus and the measurements on the scale may be distorted compared to the object itself. For example, if you are taking an examination quality photograph of the bottom of a shoe for comparison purposes, you would flip the shoe over so that you can take the image of the pattern to the sole. That's going to make the shoe several inches off the ground, right? So the shoe is here, but when you flip it over, the bottom of the shoe is going to be way up here. In order to make sure you have a good close-up examination quality photograph, you're going to actually want the scale to be at the same height as the sole of the shoe. So you're going to actually have to lift up the scale as well. The easiest way to do this is to use a stack of coins underneath the shoe. The coin stack can be easily adjusted to correspond with the height of the evidence, and it's something that's easy to set up and remove from the scene as well. Here's an example of a mid-range and a close-up photograph. Notice that the mid-range image includes a fixed feature of the scene, in this case, the concrete blocks. In order to reduce the measurement distortion in mid-range photographs, it's best practice to have the evidence and the fixed point in a straight line across the image. This puts both features at the same distance away from the camera, and that's going to eliminate perspective distortion, and it allows the viewer to better identify the spatial relationship between the evidence and the fixed point. The next photograph is a close-up examination quality photograph. The impression fills the frame, there's a labeled scale, and it's on the same plane as the evidence, and the camera is held directly above the image looking perpendicularly down towards the impression. If the impression were deeper into the ground, the scale would need to be dug into the surrounding mud in order to remain on the same plane. But in this case, because it's a shallow impression, the scale was still in focus and still okay at the top of the dirt. When processing a crime scene, you're going to take multiple mid-range and close-up photographs. You're going to take a series of mid-range and close-up photographs for evidence in the scene during your initial search. These photographs will not include any evidence markers, any scales, any other kind of documentation. They simply provide a visual record of the evidence that you identify early in your search. After you move objects and after you add evidence markers to the scene, you're going to take another series of mid-range and close-up images. You should also take more close-up images after you process evidence at the scene, like when you powder powder objects for fingerprints at the scene. You take another set of mid-range and close-up photographs. The easiest way is to ensure that all your photographs are captured is to do the mid-range and the close-up images in pairs. So during your initial search, after you take a mid-range photograph documenting the location of a piece of evidence, take the close-up directly after. Then, maybe you move a piece of furniture. Take a mid-range of that picture again, take a mid-range of that evidence again, and then take a close-up again. Then, now you're going to add an evidence marker to it. And then you're going to take a mid-range and a close-up evidence photograph again. Now with the evidence marker in the image. And then if you powder the object for fingerprints, you're going to you take another close-up photograph that includes the evidence marker and this time includes the scale. So series of photographs if needed. Here's an example of the close-up as is and the close-up after processing. If you have marked the evidence with an evidence marker, you should also include that in the photograph or label the scale so that you can match the evidence up with the photograph later on. The last topic I want to discuss relates to crime scene photography and court admissibility. In order to be admissible for court, photographs must meet 4 requirements. First, they must represent a fair and accurate representation of the crime scene. This means that the photograph should do the best job possible of representing the scene as it appeared to the naked eye, meaning that the photographs should be properly exposed, they should have color accuracy, they should represent spatial relationships accuracy, and they should be in focus. The second criteria is that the photographs must be relevant and material. Being relevant means that the photographs can help prove or disprove a disputed fact in the case. Being material means they're important to the case, and they're not just extra detail that's provided to the trier of fact. The third criteria is authentic. The photographs must represent the scene the way it was when you found it. Again, this is why you take the series of mid-range and close-up photographs so that you can document where everything was when you found it, where everything was when you moved it, and where everything was after you processed it. If you forget to document with photographs before something's moved or altered in some way, never attempt to recreate the photograph by putting the object back. Simply document the location where it was originally with the evidence marker or other notation in your field notes, and then use your narrative to describe why the evidence was moved and where it was photographed instead. Now, another way to ensure authenticity is to maintain a chain of custody. Photographers should know when they took the photo, what's in the picture, and where it was taken. While you are at the scene, this means you should keep a photo log of all the pictures you were taking. You should also label all the scales or other markers in your photographs so that you know which close-up images go with which case. Ideally, your scale labels should include location, case name, the time and the date, and the photographer's name. You will also have all that information on the photo identifier card at the front of the roll as well. Now, the final criteria relates to the content of the image itself. The photograph must be more probative than prejudicial. Prejudicial evidence would prejudice the jury against the defendant, potentially upsetting the jury to the point where they lose their objectivity. So your photographs must be carefully composed to avoid overtly prejudicial elements. For example, when you're taking a photograph of a victim, if you're including their face when they're crying, that's going to evoke sympathy and it may heighten the jury's emotion. A judge may rule that photographs are too prejudicial if they are highly gruesome as well. So, for example, if you have a scene that contains excessive amounts of blood, that could be upsetting for the jury members, and it may prejudice them against the defendant. In these type of scenes, photographers often use Photoshop to change the images to grayscale, and that reduces the impact of the blood, and it may limit the prejudicial nature of the images themselves by making them a little bit easier for the jury to stomach. As most departments move to all digital photography, the use of enhancement computer programs is becoming more and more prevalent. However, there are a few guidelines to keep clear of before you try to submit an altered photograph in court. Image enhancement programs like Photoshop can be really useful for crime scene investigators. They can help enhance the clarity of the image. They can remove or alter colors in the image. They can allow for cropping and adjusting of the image layout, and even more. However, like all parts of crime scene processing, it's important that the image enhancement process be completed carefully and methodically. First, the image should be copied so that the photographer is not working with the original image. Then the photographer should document each step of the enhancement process, including what settings they changed, what order the alteration was done in, etc., as specific as possible. This creates what we call an enhancement log. Ideally, the enhancement log should allow another photographer to copy the original image again, redo all of the enhancements over in order, and then end up with the exact same photograph. If the enhancement log is missing details, or if the original image is altered instead of the copy, the photograph becomes open to admissibility challenges regarding its authenticity, because now we can't prove that you didn't do something to the photograph that you haven't said. All right, well, that's all for our crime scene photography lecture. Thanks for watching, everybody.